Mark in Chicago says you disagree with me. What do you disagree with me about, Mark?
Well, I don't disagree. I wanted your take, as I mentioned to the call screener, Tom, that I am a conservative. I live here in Illinois my entire life, and there's a pattern here with some of the Illinois, Tom, is an abject failure almost across every metric. And I'd mentioned to the call screener that Chicago has not had a Republican mayor in, I think, since back the 30s, okay? We have had some Republican governors, but it's been very, very sparse. This is not the only example. You've got California and some other areas that are just woefully dysfunctional.
California's doing great, Mark. You want woefully dysfunctional? Look at Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi, where you've got a vaccination rate below 30 and where you've got infant and child mortality rates. We're talking dead people, infant and child mortality rates that are worse than third world countries. I mean, the Republican-run states are absolute flaming disasters. The majority of this country's GDP comes out of democratically run states. The quality of life is better in democratically run states. Yes, a lot of our cities have some challenges, but you know, please name one big city run by a Republican that is really doing well right now. Well, actually, I can name one for you, Salt Lake City, but that's about it.
Hey, Tom.
Yes, sir.
All these states, and I'm not suggesting that there aren't issues. There's issues across the board. Illinois people are fleeing this state. I believe it a rate higher than any other state in the country.
Well, you say people are fleeing, Mark.
Jersey, I'm not. Other states don't have issues, but when you've got the kind of corruption, the taxes, and just the overall corruption, it's off the charts.
Okay, so what's your question, Mark?
Well, my question is, don't you see an issue there that when you've got supermajority democratically run, and to think that Illinois is even remotely a functioning state?
Well, I disagree with your premise. I think Illinois is functioning fairly well, and I think a good chunk of Chicago is functioning fairly well. You do have there, as you have in many cities in the United States, as a consequence of decades and decades of redlining. You know, the latest thing that we just learned about, you know, or at least I just learned about in the last 6 months or so, was that when the highways were put in back in the 1950s, they were intentionally run right through the middle of or on the borders of largely black communities. And what they effectively did is they isolated those communities. They literally created ghettos of poverty and locked people into those communities. And, you know, this was done for the benefit of largely white suburban people. And so you've got cities that are struggling with a legacy of this kind of structural racism. I don't have an easy answer for it. Do you?
I don't. And I told your call screener, who I enjoy talking with, by the way, you mentioned, you know, you brought in racism, and there's another thing that, and I told her I would stay on topic, but since you nibbled on it, you nibbled around the edges. Black people have been voting Democratic overwhelmingly for 50 years.
Since the 1960s, yeah.
Yeah, that Tom, again, to me, I'm just observing. I'm just a 59-year-old man that's just observing, and I think the black person has been, their life and quality of life has been, it's not even close. I mean, I think it has gotten significantly worse over that period of time. And I think, where's the return on your investment for voting Democratic for 50 years?
Well, you've got to consider the challenges that you're up against, Mark. For example, Lyndon Johnson cut poverty in half in the United States and more than in half in the black community in less than a decade with the Great Society programs. When Ronald Reagan came into office in 1981, one of the first things he did in the first 6 months of his administration was cut housing subsidies in Section 8 housing, which was working quite well at that point in time, cut it in half. He cut it again by another quarter over the next 7 years. So, you know, in addition to shutting down, you know, mental health facilities and homeless shelters that were federally funded. So he basically dumped all that stuff on the cities in order to as a consequence of his massive tax cut. He dropped the top income tax rate from 74% down to 25%, and then said, hey, we don't have any money. And this is what happened. So if you're a city run by a Democrat or a Republican, what do you do?
Well, you know what, Tom? You obviously have all the facts and figures. I'm just looking at there's been, the Clintons were in office. Barack Obama was in office. What I have seen with the black community, I think, is absolutely horrendous on how, my observation, they vote Democratic and they get all kinds of promises. And, Tom, the result has been just where I would want to
Mark, I suspect that
where's the return on your investment?
There is a thriving black middle class in Chicago. You're probably unaware of it. You don't hear about it on right-wing talk radio, white right-wing talk radio. There's an affluent black community in Chicago. Yes, and there's also a poor black community. There's also a poor white community in Chicago. There's a poor Hispanic community in Chicago. And in any of those, poverty there's an association between poverty and crime. And there's an association between homelessness and crime. And we could do something about that. Lyndon Johnson tried to essentially outlaw poverty and homelessness. And he had incredible success over 10 years. And then Reagan came in and dismantled it. Bush continued those policies, Bush the elder. Bill Clinton actually continued those policies. And of course, you had Newt Gingrich taking over Congress, the House of Representatives. So, even if Clinton didn't want to continue those policies, there wasn't much he could do. So instead, Clinton came out and said, well, we're going to end welfare as you know it. And he cut everything to no more than 5 years. And, frankly, we have been living in this Reaganomics world, in this neoliberal austerity world since 1981. And we're still there. And if Biden can't get through Congress, $4 or $5 trillion worth of spending, which is just a drop in the bucket. You look at the American Society of Engineers, which is has nothing to do with politics, and they're saying, we've got a 4, 5, 6 trillion, depending on whose numbers you're using, deficit just in maintenance on our infrastructure. Much less do we want to build, the kind of rail that can support high-speed rail like you've got in South Korea or Taiwan or China or all over Europe. Or do you want to have high-speed broadband like Chattanooga has done? 1 gig broadband for everybody in town, and it's run by the city, so there's no profit motive. It's less expensive than getting it from these for-profit companies. If the Republicans can continue to obstruct this and keep us in Reaganomics austerity, then yeah, you're going to have Democratic-run areas that do not have access to these resources. And they are presiding over cities that don't have a large enough tax base in those areas where there is poverty so that they can raise enough money to rebuild their schools and rebuild their infrastructure. Not to mention, like I said, that those communities are physically segregated by things like freeways and whatnot. It's going to be a real challenge. And the Republicans are going to continue talking, like what you're saying here, essentially. Oh, look at that. They're doing poorly. Well, yeah, we set this situation up. Yeah, Mark.
That's not fair. Everything is the Republicans' fault. Everything is.
I will acknowledge, Mark, that everything is not the Republicans' fault. In fact, I thought I just said Bill Clinton did not do anything consequential about this. But